ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track. And ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
Now, here's Roger Stone.
Welcome. I'm Roger Stone, and this is the Roger Stone Show on this beautiful Sunday. We here at 77 WABC are the crown jewel of AM radio, literally the most influential and important AM station in the country, bar none. You don't want to miss any of our great programming, folks, so take a quick moment to go to the App Store and download the 77 WABC radio app. That way, for example, if you miss Larry Kudlow's great show on Saturday, well, you could listen to it on Sunday afternoon. Or if you miss Cindy Adams' great show on WABC, you can hear it at your leisure. Dominic Carter, Frank Morano, Curtis Sliwa, the great Sid Rosenberg. There is so much news, so much talent right here at 77 WABC. By downloading the app to your phone, you can go back later and listen to all of the greats. So I strongly urge you to do that. We're here, of course, every Sunday from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock Eastern. But if you don't live in the greater New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, where I proudly grew up, well, then you can go to WABCradio.com. That's WABCradio.com. I can tell from our mail, email, text mail, and even regular postal mail that people across the country are listening to the Roger Stone Show and therefore listening to 77 WABC. So keep those cards and letters coming, folks. And, well, if you're in Pocatello and you want to hear the Roger Stone Show, all you got to do is go on to WABCradio.com, WABCradio.com. You know, one of the things that I miss the most about New York City, which has changed so very dramatically since I worked there in two presidential campaigns, the Reagan campaign of 1980, the Reagan re-election campaign of 1984, and of course later for President Donald Trump's campaign, at least in the earliest stages, before we had headquarters, before we had an office, but we were planning the president's campaign from the offices of the Trump Organization at Trump Tower, a property that if the outrages by the New York state court system continue, President Trump may actually no longer end, although I wouldn't bet on that. The 21 Club was on 52nd Street. Now, it had been a speakeasy back in the days of Prohibition, run by two guys, Jack and Charlie. It was the place to see and be seen on any given night when you went there, or at lunchtime particularly. You might see Gina Lollobrigida or New York Yankees owner George Steinbrenner, President Richard Nixon, the actress Dina Merrill, Senator Robert F. Kennedy Sr., it was the place to see and be seen. It's the place Sinatra always came for dinner whenever he was in town. The food was absolutely amazing. In fact, one of my all-time favorites, the 21 Burger. I've done some historical research, and before the end of today's program, I'm going to tell you the precise recipe for what is, without any question, the greatest burger I have ever had, the 21 burger. So you're going to want to hold on for that. One of my most favorite memories of the 21 Club was when I was working for Ronald Reagan's nascent 1980 Republican campaign for president. I actually showed up in New York, which was an establishment Republican state where most of the party regulars were at the service of either Treasury Secretary John Connally or former UN Ambassador George Bush. And I was behind the eight ball trying to organize New York State for Ronald Reagan. Now, Mike Deaver, who had been President Ronald Reagan's body man, actually Governor Ronald Reagan's body man, gave me a small card file, like index cards, like those 4x6 cards, or 3x5, I guess they were. And this was allegedly the list of the Reagan's personal contacts and friends in New York City. What I found was, when I sifted through the cards, that virtually all of them were theatrical in nature, meaning they dated till Ronald Reagan's days in show business. And frankly, more than half of the people on the cards were deceased. Remember, Reagan was at that time the oldest candidate for president in history, and many believed he was too old to win. To the contrary, he not only won, he went on to be a highly successful president. He rebuilt the country's military strength. He rebuilt respect for America abroad. He also, in time for re-election, rebuilt what was until then the greatest economic boom and robust revival of our economy until Donald Trump became president. But on this one occasion, I went through the card file and I found a card for Roy M. Cohn, Esquire. Roy Cohn, the famous legendary fixer, Democratic Party power broker, who had been counsel to the McCarthy Committee in the U.S. Senate. Roy Cohn's name is a name that can make liberals seethe even today. Bring up his name, and you will see liberals melt down. Cohn was a tough customer, an anti-communist, and of course later a very, very successful lawyer in New York City. Cohn's great strength as a lawyer is that as soon as anybody in a legal matter retained Roy Cohn, while the other side almost immediately wanted to settle. So vicious were his courtroom tactics and his deep understanding of the tabloids and the role that the media plays on the courts and on public opinion surrounding, a presidential campaign. It was through Roy Cohn that I met Joey and Cindy Adams. And while we're at it, happy birthday to Cindy Adams, who I'm proud to have as a colleague here at 77 WABC. Any event, on this particular occasion, Roy Cohn said that we should go to lunch at the 21 Club. He was trying to help me and thus help Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign, and that we would have lunch with Rupert Murdoch, who at that point owned the New York Post, but did not yet own Fox News. Now, the New York Post was vitally important in those days. New York, as today, had two tabloid newspapers. For some reason, the New York Daily News, which had always been the newspaper of working class Italian, Irish, Polish, Eastern European, and middle-class, non-elite New Yorkers had decided to begin to trade in its niche and try to become more like the New York Times, a more elite newspaper, a more arts-oriented newspaper. I never really understood that because the Daily News was very powerful and very influential before they decided to essentially move left. But Rupert Murdoch was a man who used his newspaper like a cudgel. Coming out of the Fleet Street tradition of journalism, his was advocacy journalism, and Roy Cohn knew that it was vitally important ultimately for the New York Post to endorse Ronald Reagan if Ronald Reagan was going to have any chance to carry New York State. So we gathered for lunch, and Rupert Murdoch was very gracious. He had a number of questions about the campaign and how it was going. There was a woman and her companion sitting very close to us. The seats upstairs at 21 were very close together. Ultimately, the upstairs dining room would be closed, and the downstairs bar room would be the place to see and be seen. I remember very specifically a metal plaque on the wall at the seat that was favored by former President Richard Nixon. And during our lunch, Roy got so completely wrapped up in the conversation, he did something that I'd actually seen him do before. He reached over to the next table, and he took a piece of lettuce out of this woman's salad, and he popped it in his mouth. Needless to say, this dowager was not very happy about that. She screamed at the top of her lungs, a blood-curdling scream. The maitre d' came forward and said, "Madam, what's the problem?" "This man," she said, "this man stuck his fingers in my plate." Roy Cohn calmly looked at her and said, "Lady, you're drunk." The thing settled down, and then Rupert Murdoch said to Roy Cohn, "Roy, who is Mildred Hilson?" Now, Mildred Hilson was a socialite. She lived in the Waldorf Towers. She was well known in civic and charitable circles in New York City. But Roy said, "Rupert, Mildred Hilson is a big, fat nobody. Why do you ask?" And Rupert Murdoch said, "Well, I just got an invitation from Mildred Hilson, who's inviting my wife Anna, then, and I to a reception at the Waldorf Towers apartment where she lives for George and Barbara Bush. What do you think?" And Cohn said, "I wouldn't be caught dead there." At that point, Roy Cohn called over a waiter and said, "Go down to the basement and go to the cigar locker and bring me 2 of Jerry Finkelstein's finest cigars." Jerry Finkelstein was the publisher of the New York Law Journal. His nickname was Lupo, the Wolf. He was a brilliant investor and businessman, a good friend of Cohn's, yet another big New York City Democratic power broker. And then these were the days in which you could, in fact, still smoke inside a restaurant. And Roy not only lit up his cigar, but seems to be purposely blowing smoke in the direction of this woman sitting next to us. She had tried to get her table moved, but we had a full house, so she was stuck within the immediate vicinity of Roy M. Cohn, Esquire. Cohn never actually ordered any lunch when you ate dinner or lunch with him, no meal. He would always say he was not hungry, but then happily eat from your plate, unfortunately using his fingers. I remember once going to a meeting of Tammany judges and their wives. I think it was upstairs in an Italian restaurant in Times Square. And on the way, Roy invited me to go with him. On the way there, he said, look, the food's not very good here. We're going to go to Oren and Aretsky's, a restaurant that was uptown. Ironically, Kenny Aretsky would later become one of the owners of the 21 Club in one of its later incarnations. But I sat with all these judges and their wives, and I watched while Roy Cohn leaned over and calmly rolled the Parmesan off the piece of veal Parmesan that this judge's wife, who was sitting next to Cohn, had ordered, and ate it without missing a beat, without stopping talking. So this habit of dipping into others' plates, habit my wife found particularly repugnant, understandably, was something that he did. After blowing smoke in this woman's face for a good 20 minutes, the woman approached our table, stuck out her hand to Rupert Murdoch and said, "Mr. Murdoch, I'm Mildred Hilson. I'm so delighted to hear that you'll be able to attend our small cocktail party for George and Bar Bush." She then shot Cohn a look that could kill, and she left. Roy stood up and announced to the entire dining room, "That lady was drunk. They should keep drunks out of here." That is one of my fondest memories of not only the Great 21 Club, but the power broker who played a very key role in ensuring that in the end, in 1980, it was Ronald Reagan who carried New York State. The New York State Reagan campaign, my first great political experience in New York State, was an extraordinarily interesting exercise. It was 1979. The candidacies of George H.W. Bush and Secretary of the Treasury John Connally, as well as Congressman John Anderson, were stalled. In the petitioning process, I built the mechanism in order to get Ronald Reagan delegates on the ballot in every single congressional district in the state. Our de facto leader in the state was Brooklyn Republican Chairman, Kings County Republican Chairman George L. Clark Jr., a very brave man, because as long as Nelson Rockefeller was alive, as he had been in 1976, when Clark also held out a small block of Reagan delegates in the contest against Gerald Ford, I remember very specifically Governor Nelson Rockefeller sticking his finger in George Clark's face and saying, "This is not your sandbox." Well, in 1976, the New York Republican Party was Nelson Rockefeller's sandbox. 4 years later, however, George Clark, working with Kieran Mahoney and others in the New York State Conservative Party, working with others across the New York State Republican Party. In the end, we skunked George Bush. We won every single New York delegate for Ronald Reagan. It was a shock to the Bush folks. You see, I handled Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York, and they considered this to be, establishment Republican territory. The idea that an insurgent candidate like Ronald Reagan, a cowboy movie actor from the West, could swoop in and take every single delegate. Well, that was not in their play card. My other great memory of the 21 Club before we go to break is the day that Georgie Jessel showed up. That's right, Georgie Jessel, the legendary vaudeville actor, movie actor, producer, famous for his many wives, was dining at the 21 Club for lunch and insisted in coming over to tour the headquarters. At that point, Jessel was in his 80s. He referred to himself as the Toastmaster General of the United States. He wore a military-type hat and a number of medals. And to this day, there is a great picture in the New York Times archives of vaudeville great Georgie Jessel, a very young Roger Stone, and Kings County Republican Chairman George L. Clark Jr. In the Reagan headquarters that was in the Brownstone building directly next to the 21 Club. What great memories of old New York. If you're just tuning in, folks, this is the Roger Stone Show. We've got a lot more for you, so don't go anywhere.
The rural way of life is about making everyone feel at home. Tractor Supply chose advanced 5G solutions from T-Mobile for Business to transform intelligent customer service. Together, we put the power of AI to work across 2,200 stores, keeping things running seamlessly inside, curbside, and countryside. This is elevated customer experience. This is Tractor Supply with T-Mobile for Business. Take your business further at T-Mobile.com/now.
Morning decisions. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? A sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel or that white chocolate mocha. Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Start your day with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.
Shopping is hard, right? But I found a better way. Stitch Fix online personal styling makes it easy. I just give my stylist my size, style, and budget preferences. I order boxes when I want and how I want. No subscription required. And he sends just for me pieces, plus outfit recommendations and styling tips. I keep what works and send back the rest. It's so easy. Make style easy. Get started today at StitchFix.com/Spotify. That's StitchFix.com/Spotify.
Grandpa's here!
Hank's always helping out. Grandpa style. Now he's treating his prostate cancer with help from Xtandi enzalutamide. Xtandi 40 milligram tablets treats men with prostate cancer that has spread to other parts of the body and responds to a medical or surgical treatment to lower testosterone. Xtandi may cause serious side effects: seizure, a brain condition called PRESS, allergic reactions, heart disease that can lead to death, falls and bone fractures, swallowing problems, or choking that can lead to death. Stop Xtandi and get medical help at once if your face, tongue, lip, or throat start swelling. Tell your doctor at once if you faint, have a seizure, quickly worsening headache, decreased alertness, confusion, vision problems, chest pain or discomfort, or shortness of breath. Xtandi can cause harm to an unborn baby or miscarriage. Use birth control during and 3 months after Xtandi. Common side effects include muscle and joint pain, feeling unusually tired, hot flashes, constipation, less appetite, diarrhea, high blood pressure, bleeding, falls, fractures, and headache. Talk to your doctor and visit Xtandi.com.
This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back, folks. I'm Roger Stone, and this is the Roger Stone Show on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. It's great to reminisce about the great 21 Club, one of the great spots, kind of like the Oyster Bar underneath Grand Central Station or Café des Arts. So many great spots in New York City that are just, well, no longer with us. But I know the real reason people tune into the Roger Stone Show on Sunday is because they want the inside skinny on politics. And today you're going to get it. Giving his first interview in over 8 years, Carter Page, who was the young Reagan advisor who was illegally targeted by federal prosecutors and the FBI through the FISA program to be spied on during President Donald Trump's campaign, joins us today on the Roger Stone Show. Now, his story is particularly egregious because only 10 days ago, roughly, the U.S. Congress, by one lone vote, sadly the vote of Speaker Johnson, decided to renew the FISA program. Despite the obvious abuses, folks, the FISA program was illegally used to target President Donald Trump in his campaign, and unfortunately, Carter Page was the victim. Not only did they place a truly probable cause-less FISA warrant on Carter Page, allowing them to electronically spy on him, as well as tailing him and digging into all of his emails, text messages, and phone calls. But they renewed that warrant every time it expired, even though they knew that the entire probable cause of justifying the warrant was non-existent. They knew the so-called Steele dossier, that's the secret report that was paid for by Hillary Clinton, which smeared President Donald Trump, claiming that he had cavorted with prostitutes in Moscow when he was a private citizen and had been in a compromising situation. This was a falsehood. It had been peddled by the intelligence services to the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. None of them would print it until, of course, it was published by Mike Isikoff at yahoo.com. And that is when the Democrats in turn point to that publication and say, you see, it's in print, therefore it must be true. Also joining us today is former White House Trump advisor Robert Bose. He's going to bring us up to date on the shocking indictments in Arizona late last Friday, where President Trump, Mayor Rudy Giuliani, and 15 other people were charged in that state. I'm not really clear what the charge is. I guess now questioning the outcome of an election, which everyone has the right to do under the First Amendment, is a crime. This one seems a bit more open and shut. I'm going to ask Robert Bose about that. He's a former, as I say, Trump White House advisor, but I'm not sure why they couldn't just take the information on voter fraud and irregularities that was introduced to the U.S. Supreme Court only weeks ago and use it as the basis for a motion to dismiss in the New York State legal system. And brother, she lets you know exactly how she feels. I want to ask Alina Habba as well. Final result of the so-called valuation trial, where Donald Trump was charged with borrowing money from banks, submitting collateral, putting an estimate on the value of that collateral. The banks then conducted their own due diligence, conducted their own appraisal, decided to make the loans on the basis of the value of that appraisal, and then, of course, were paid back handsomely in full. In some cases, actually paid back a little early, and the banks made as much as $40 million on their loans. No victim, no crime. Yet President Donald Trump has been put under severe financial pressure, even for a multi-billionaire, by this entire illicit motion by the court. So I want to ask Alina about that. I want to ask her about the ongoing late last week in the U.S. Supreme Court regarding the assertion by President Donald Trump's lawyers that he has full presidential immunity for his actions as president. So it's a jam-packed show today, folks. If you're at 770 on the AM dial, don't touch that dial. And if you're not, you can go right now to WABCRadio.com and you'll hear all of these great guests and more. And before the end of the show, that's right, I'm going to give you the old 21 Club burger recipe. I did some research. This was the greatest hamburger in all of New York City. Apologies to the folks over at PJ Clark's or up at the Beach Cafe or maybe even at JP Mellon's, but the 21 burger was it, and I've got the recipe. You'll hear it before the end of the show. So folks, fasten your seatbelts because, as Jackie Gleason used to say, away we go.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Business. How can you free up your team from time-consuming office tasks? Amazon Business empowers leaders to not only streamline purchasing, but better support their teams so they can focus on strategy and growth. Free up your teams and focus on your future. Learn more about the technology, insights, and support available at amazonbusiness.com.
This episode is brought to you by Factor. Optimize your nutrition this year with Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal service. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved, ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from 40 weekly options across 8 dietary preferences like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Eat smarter at factormeals.com/listen50 and use code listen50 for 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Factormeals.com/listen50, code listen50. T's and C's apply.
Home means something different to everyone. But with Rocket Mortgage, home can mean even more. It can mean a college education, taming your high-interest debt, even a renovation. We've made it easier than ever to use your home equity. That home you worked so hard for, now it can work hard for you. Call 800-4ROCKET or visit rocket.com to find out more.
Rocket Mortgage, LLC, licensed in all 50 states. NMLSconsumeraccess.org, number 3030.
Mic check. 1, 2. Are we recording? Hi, I'm Michelle Bernstein, an award-winning chef, restaurateur, and mom. I have a lot on my plate, including my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. That's why I was prescribed Cosentyx. It helps me move better.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for people 2 years of age and older with active psoriatic arthritis. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your rheumatologist about Cosentyx.
Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Ronald Reagan.
Tear down this wall.
George W. Bush.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
And Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back, folks. I'm Roger Stone, and this is The Roger Stone Show at 77 WABC, the most dynamic, influential AM radio station in America today. Joining me today is a historical figure. Only less than 10 days ago, by one lone vote, the U.S. House of Representatives renewed the FISA program. That is the program passed in the wake of 9/11, which allows the federal government theoretically to surveil foreign nationals and foreign threats to this country. But in the Russian collusion hoax that was targeted at President Donald Trump, the FISA program was used illicitly to spy on this man, Carter Page. Now, Carter Page was working on President Donald Trump's campaign, then candidate Donald Trump's campaign in the foreign policy realm. Carter Page, very much like yours truly, did nothing wrong. He was not colluding with Russians. He was not plotting with WikiLeaks. He was working on the campaign. Yet the government, particularly the intelligence agencies and our Justice Department, in their zeal to rationalize an effort to remove a duly elected president, Donald Trump, targeted Carter Page. They not only approved a FISA warrant, asked a judge to approve a FISA warrant to spy on him, but then they renewed that warrant multiple times, even though they know there was no real probable cause for that warrant. Carter Page joins us now.
Roger, so great to be with you. Thank you so much for your kind introduction and for everything you've continued to do to, help President Trump in terms of getting the word out and, step by step, seeing what we can do about fixing this country. So it's just a tragic situation along the lines of what you've outlined.
Well, look, I really do believe this is the last battle. I believe that if we have a free, fair, honest, and transparent election, that Donald Trump will be returned to the White House. It remains to be seen whether we can achieve that, although I think it is possible. But we're going to be talking about that later on in the show with some of our other guests. I really want to focus on how you felt just a few days ago when you saw the intelligence services program, which was used to target you and which could have then either been ended or it could have been substantially reformed to build in protections for American citizens, U.S. taxpayers. But instead, Speaker Mike Johnson cast the deciding vote to reauthorize the program exactly as it stands today, and therefore exactly the way that it was abused in your case. How did you feel about that?
Roger, I think it goes directly back to the point you were making in terms of the importance of this election. I think it's a great demonstration about how one vote can make such a difference in terms of, solving the problems in our country. And everything you said thus far and, going back so many years has been so spot on. But the one point I would, slightly push back on, Jan, when you say, the vote allows you to theoretically surveil. Let me tell you something. It is not theoretical. We know time and time again with the crimes that were committed against President Trump, with those 4 warrants, illegal abuse of process warrants that you correctly alluded to, they've done it time and time and time again, right? And, they'll do a little bit of an investigation, but, it only gets worse and worse and worse. And so I think it's a great little case study of all the challenges that our country faces, particularly President Trump, because he has been, public enemy number one and the main target of all these crimes that have continued to roll out as the ongoing threat against, our democracy and the destruction which has been, achieved against our U.S. Constitution, which has been in force for centuries. It's just a step-by-step process. And I know you've kind of, alongside myself, and you've been particularly even more so on the front lines of these crimes. But I think your point about the one lone vote it's just an absolute tragedy. And it just, it's a wake-up call that we really need to kind of ramp up and do everything possible to make sure that President Trump gets reelected in November.
So, Carter, I met you only once. It was 8 years ago. You graciously attended a book party at the Metropolitan Republican Club on the Upper East Side, where I was signing my book. I think it was Stone's Rules, with a foreword by Tucker Carlson. You can get your copy of that by going to stonezone.com. If you're really interested, you get an autographed copy. But and then I had my picture taken with you, showed it to my lawyers. They knew I was under investigation at that time. They said, perhaps you shouldn't post this picture. And I said, the hell with that. I'm posting this picture. And of course, I later did. Kind of walk through for us exactly how this all happened to you. Now, you came to the campaign as a foreign policy area volunteer, as I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, but walk through the steps for us as to how your life got turned upside down, how your rights got violated.
Well, that one and only time I only met you 8 years ago, Roger, I think it's a great case study. It's a wonderful introduction in terms of that process. And, everything that kind of, eventually rolled out of that process. And we can get into that, but I just wanted to, along the lines of what you were saying, that party, the book party, the signing party, where I got a copy of your terrific book at the Metropolitan Republican Club up on the Upper East Side. And I look back in my notes because, again, as we've been through with these crimes and these, the criminal abusive process by both the, the federal government as well as the U.S. Congress in terms of the step-by-step process of invading our rights. I know it was on May 12th, 2016, right? And and how did I figure that out? Well, 1 year later, I was forced, by federal investigators and the FBI and Congress, both the House and the Senate, to self-report everything I've done to support President Trump, and so it was an ongoing process. But, listen, the ridiculousness of it is I was just, as you say, just I was fortunate to be part of a volunteer advisory committee that was put together quite early in the campaign. And unfortunately, they were really looking to, almost immediately, because I had supported the U.S. intelligence community. I'm a Naval Academy graduate. I worked in various, surface warfare as well as intelligence missions around the world during my years in the U.S. Navy. And I had ties to the intelligence community. And so I've supported our country in terms of, helping to push back against terrorists and other sort of, threats, real national security threats to our country, as opposed to these made up ones, which have been, constantly rolled out and which you hear about on the fake news every night. But, I was fortunate enough to have that opportunity to, get to know some really incredible people. And it was similar to myself. A lot of them were, military veterans. A lot of generals and admirals were on our committee. And so I was, it was a great honor and privilege to spend some time with them and really try putting together new ideas. Contrary, you mentioned the FISA reauthorization. We were kind of, helping President Trump, then candidate Trump, to, spell out some of the details in terms of fixing our country and really helping to push forward the terrible problems in U.S. foreign policy going back many, many decades, consistently across, many administrations. Obviously you were a key advisor to President Nixon, but, he was at the front lines of détente, right, in terms of, trying to find new approaches with the Soviet Union. And he succeeded. And, then President Reagan, someone else you worked for, he was, at the end of the first Cold War, he was pushed back a lot against a lot as well. Nothing like President Trump in terms of all the headwinds that he faced. But, Frank Carlucci, some of the, the Secretary of Defense under him, was kind of, well, I'm not so sure about trying a new approach. Let's kind of stick with the swamp mentality of, there's only one way, and we have to be at a constant war with Russia, or kind of, escalating in the direction of a war. And, he was smart enough, and he was a great enough negotiator, President Reagan, to kind of help forge a new pathway forward. And I think that is exactly what President Trump, then candidate Trump, was laying out in, when he announced in 2015 and, throughout that year, and, what he was, talking about in 2016. And unfortunately, that only escalated all of the attacks against him. And, the fact that I had done a lot in Russia, I'd done over $25 billion of deals in Russia, and so, I was the prime target. And so they were particularly, interested in me because they could, make up all kinds of crazy stories similar to the ongoing crazy stories that President Trump continues to face today.
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive. The way it used to work is the Republicans were more aggressive. The Democrats were more in favor of peace. Donald Trump comes along and says, look, we should have better relationships with countries like Russia and China because they have nuclear weapons, and we could have an international conflagration. So better relations with the Russians and the Chinese, constructive relations based in trust are better. The left immediately accuses him of being soft on Russia. The truth is, after decades of endless foreign war, costing us billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives, millions if you count the foreign victims of those wars, Donald Trump ran in 2016 as the peace candidate, as the man who would bring our troops home from the endless foreign wars and would start no new ones, a pledge, interestingly enough, that he kept. Rather than have people see this as a conciliatory or more reasonable foreign policy approach, they attacked him as being a stooge for the Kremlin, which is, of course, ridiculous. Their entire effort to take him down built on two completely false claims. The so-called Steele dossier, which we have now established definitively in Special Counsel John Durham's report, which I'm going to ask you about in a minute, Carter, but he absolutely determines and documents that the so-called Steele dossier, which was a report which claimed falsely that President, then candidate, then private citizen Donald Trump had cavorted with Russian prostitutes on a trip to Moscow, and that he had been entertained by watching prostitutes urinate on a bed in a hotel suite, which had previously been used by Barack Obama. This is, of course, an entire fiction. It's a fiction that MSNBC continued to push long past the time that it was clearly debunked. It is a fiction that both the FBI and the CIA knew was false. They knew the provenance of this document, of this report. They knew it had actually been paid for by Hillary Clinton's campaign. By the way, she disguised those payments as legal fees, and therefore why she wasn't charged under the same theory that President Donald Trump is standing trial in New York City today, well, that would be hard to figure out. What in the end, they had to rationalize spying on you through the approval of a FISA warrant, but what in the end was it that they suspected or accused you, if anything, of doing?
Well, I think you summarized it almost perfectly, Roger. And the only thing I would slightly mention in terms of what you mentioned, it's not that MSNBC continued to push. They continue today, not past tense. They are still pushing, the latest Russia hoax. Just complete lies. And I think you kind of highlighted one of the headline lies, which is the Steele dossier, right? In terms of which is totally made up. And look, in terms of that completely ridiculous case against President Trump, I mean, this is all kind of happening at the same time in terms of some of the, allegations and craziness and, things in terms of legal fees, et cetera. I mean, that's all kind of October of 2016, right? And literally just a few days earlier, on September 23rd, 2016, they were able, with that Steele dossier and all those false allegations against myself, in the first instance, to roll out. They finally found someone at Yahoo News, Isikoff, the author there. And, it was just complete falsehoods, right? And, and again, those were cited. That same article was cited in the 4 warrants, which were completely illegal and a complete violation of President Trump's rights, all of our rights, and including myself, whose name was on the top of that sheet. But
it's funny that you mentioned Mike Isikoff. He is, of course, the quote unquote reporter with Yahoo.News who first legitimized the Steele dossier. This is what Nancy Pelosi calls the wrap-up smear. We're going to play that audio for you. So here's how the wrap-up smear works. Once again, you get some falsehood. You get a mainstream media reporter to print it, to publish it. Then you officially, in official proceedings, you point to that story as proof that the claim is true. And then, as Nancy Pelosi says, you merchandise it. That's exactly what happened here. Strangely enough, it is also Mr. Isikoff really acted as a shill for the FBI to float the bogus Steele dossier. Once again, he works as a shill for the FBI in his assertions against you. How ironic that he has recently published a book on Georgia prosecutor Fani Willis, in which he appears to have sealed grand jury testimony within his book. How could he possibly have gotten that? It is amazing how the same bad pennies keep popping up over and over again. Look, I really love this. You went into the records and found it. This is an exact quote from the transcript of the executive session of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence of the U.S. House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., Tuesday, September 26, 2017. I am testifying under oath in a private session, and Trey Gowdy, the congressman from South Carolina, asks me, "Do you know, Mr. Stone, who Carter Page is?" I say, "I know who he is." Did he have an official role or an unofficial role with the Trump campaign? I don't know, I said, because he came after I left. Mr. Gowdy said, "All right, Mr. Stone." I then said, "He did evidently go to one of my book signings and I signed a book for him." But candidly, I was unaware of who he was at that time. Now, I have little doubt that since I elected to post that picture on Facebook, this was before I was banned for life on Facebook, that the fact that you and I appeared together probably led to the fact that you were targeted. Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is the Roger Stone Show. I'm talking to Carter Page, a man whose name goes down in history because he is the individual illegally and unfairly targeted in the Russian collusion hoax to be surveilled on under a so-called FISA warrant. Don't go away, folks. We'll be right back.
Fellas, you know Degree Cool Rush deodorant, right? Well, last year they changed the formula, and guys were mad about it. One dude even started a petition. So guess what? Degree heard us, admitted they messed up, and brought the original Cool Rush scent back exactly how it was. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So grab some and remember why its cool, crisp, and fresh scent made it the #1 men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory for all of us.
Faraday presenta Ojos con Alergia y Picazón contra el Jardinero. Y el ganador es Faraday Extra Fuerte. Para aliviar la picazón de los ojos por alergia, actúa más rápido y supera a Claritin y Flonase aún a las 24 horas. Faraday, adelante.
This episode is brought to you by Hulu, presenting Paradise. Paradise is Hulu's critically acclaimed addictive drama series, starring Sterling K. Brown, Julianne Nicholson, and James Marsden. The Daily Beast calls Paradise your next TV obsession, and the New York Times says it's exhilarating in all the right ways. Paradise is for your Emmy consideration in all categories, including Outstanding Drama Series. For more information, visit fyc.hulu.com.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Welcome back, folks. I'm Roger Stone, and this is the Roger Stone Show at 77 WABC, the crown jewel of talk radio. Now would be a superb time for you to go to the App Store on your cell phone and download the 77 WABC radio app. That way you will never miss any of the dynamic and incredible program we have here at WABC. Now, if you don't live in the greater New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area where I grew up, you can listen to us worldwide at WABCradio.com. We are live streaming in 173 countries. Well, I think a couple of those countries seek to jam our programming because, well, the truth upsets some people. But pretty much anywhere, everywhere in the United States and pretty much anywhere in the country, you can listen to 77 WABC by going to WABCradio.com. So you have no excuses for ever missing the Roger Stone Show from 4 to 6 Eastern every single Sunday. We're talking to Carter Page. Carter Page, for those of you who may not remember, was a foreign policy advisor to candidate Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential campaign. That act of volunteerism changed his life, turned it upside down when he became the target of an investigation pertaining to his alleged connections to the Russians. He was historically the individual targeted for surveillance in a FISA warrant, a warrant that was renewed multiple times, by the way, with the authorization of Acting Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, long after government officials knew that Mr. Page had done nothing wrong and that there was no real probable cause to justify his surveillance. We're coming up on the 8th anniversary of our meeting. Who could ever imagine what would happen in both of our lives and in, more importantly, the lives of the nation or the lives of our president, who now stands on trial in New York City in one of the most bogus, pasted together criminal indictments I've ever seen. We're going to have a lot about that on today's show. But Carter, what has life been like since all of this happened?
Well, really, since I last saw you there in the Upper East Side in May of 2016, it's been just a complete whirlwind, and it's a small fragment of everything that President Trump has continued to face throughout this entire time. In terms of these attacks, et cetera. And it's interesting. I think that the prime example, as you're kind of alluding to, and I'm sure you'll talk about with some of your other guests, but literally five miles away from where we had our meeting, back then, 8 years ago, it's where the crazy witch hunt trial is happening downtown. And I actually lived, when I was living there in New York City at the time, and I was it was that was home, right? And it's just gone so far downhill, in that state and in that city right now that just a couple of years ago I had to leave. I've had so many death threats. I've had so much. My life has been entirely turned upside down. So I moved to a different state, out west, to kind of get away from that craziness. And so, it's just really tragic to watch, over these last several years as President Trump's First Amendment and other constitutional rights continue to get demolished, as had happened originally, as it kind of escalated the attacks against yourself, so many others, including me, Trump supporters. So I've just had enough with it, and I've tried to avoid New York City as much as possible, but I'm just I'm so outraged of the continued escalation that I'm going to make sure that I'm there, to attend that show trial downtown in Manhattan this coming week, just in support of President Trump amidst these, continued injustices. I mean, it's just been one civil rights attack and destruction of our Constitution after another. And I just, I want to stand there and just, support in any way possible.
All right, folks, we just made news here on the Roger Stone Show. Carter Page is going to attend President Trump's trial one day this week in a show of support. I must say, my wife and I watching this on TV, you don't actually obviously see the courtroom proceedings, but you see people come and go. And the quiet dignity of Donald Trump is obvious to me. His rightful anger is also apparent to me. This is one of the most ridiculous proceedings that I have ever seen. I read the opening remarks of the prosecutors, Mr. Colangelo. I'm not sure why somebody from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office could not have tried this case. I'm not sure why we had to import a guy from the Biden Justice Department to come and do it, unless, of course, it is a racketeering conspiracy of some kind. It is painful to watch, but the dignity of Donald Trump, while he's being forced to stand in the dock, while he is being forced to waste his time in a frivolous and illegitimate prosecution, draining his campaign coffers, attempting, I think, unsuccessfully to further blacken his name with the American people. None of it is working. So I'm really glad to hear that Carter Page will be at the New York trial to lend his moral support to the greatest president since Abraham Lincoln. And I wish we had more time, because I'd love to ask you a lot more about how the media abused you and the role that they played, because you know how this works. They shop these stories against you until they find a buyer. Doesn't matter how fake the story may be, how false their allegation may be. In the wrap-up smear, it's all about getting someone to print it so they can point to it and say, oh, you see, Carter Page did X, Y, and Z. It's an outrageous, abusive system. As my good friend Sean Hannity likes to say, journalism is dead in America. And indeed it is. I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Let me thank my guest, Carter Page, a man whose name will go down in history, for joining us today on The Roger Stone Show.